Good morning. My name is Estela Lopez. I'm the vice chair of the board, and I'm calling the meeting to order. As we do with every meeting, we begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
To the
to
flag
the flag of the United States of America and to the republic
for
for
which
which
it
it
stands,
stands,
one nation, under God, indivisible, and justice for all.
And
justice for all. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Aldi, will you take the attendance roll, please?
Yes, thank you. Chair Taylor,
I'm here.
Vice Chair Lopez,
Here.
Erin Benham,
Here.
Bonnie Burr,
Here.
Eric Clemens,
Present.
Karen DeBose Walton,
I'm here.
Elwood Exley.
Here.
Okay, Dr. Jane Gates will not be able to attend the meeting today. She had an emergency conflict this morning. Donald Harris,
I'm here.
Martha Poole,
Here.
Awilda Riesco,
Here.
Malia Seavey.
Here.
Thank you. That concludes the attendance roll call, and we have a quorum for the meeting.
Thank you. So now we go into public participation. I believe we have one person offering public participation, and we received 2 written statements. Is that correct, Aldi?
Please do not hang up. Your
Right,
call
yes.
and redirected to Verizon Financial Services.
Aldi, could you confirm the public participation?
Yes,
One.
we have we have 2 submitted written statements, but 1 speaker for this morning's meeting, Carol Ciota from AACTE Connecticut.
Okay, so could we have Carol please offer her public participation? And we thank also the written submissions that we received and were circulated among board members.
Carol, please go ahead.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to provide comments to the State Board of Education today. My name is Carol Ciotto, and I'm a member of the Legislative and Policy Committee for the Connecticut chapter of the American Association of Colleges for Teacher Education. I am also the Interim Assistant Dean for Accreditation and Partnerships at Central Connecticut State University in New Britain. The AACTE in Connecticut is an association of 14 public and private colleges and universities that provide educator preparation programs to students interested in the education profession. We promote and strongly support high-quality teaching and education in the state's schools and are advocates for robust educational leadership. On behalf of the AACTE of Connecticut, thank you to the Board of Education, Commissioner Cardona, the Department of Education, and especially to those individuals with whom the AACTE of Connecticut works with frequently. The AACTE of Connecticut member institutions are working diligently to ensure their individual educator preparation programs are attracting and preparing their students to become excellent future teachers and educational leaders here in Connecticut. While COVID-19 continues to transform the landscape of learning, teachers and leaders remain constant in doing what they do best, facing each challenge head-on and figuring out how to effectively respond to support their students and move our programs forward. We believe we must look beyond the immediate concerns to what may be possible for education in Connecticut on the other side of the COVID-19 pandemic. Over the past several months, our teachers and leaders have learned to quickly pivot from operating in crisis mode to viewing our programs through a lens of potential and innovation. With the General Assembly underway, we would like to work in collaboration with the Department of Education where possible on legislation and policy of mutual interest so that we can advance our programs and continue to effectively produce high qualified, competent, and compassionate teachers and leaders for Connecticut schools. As an organization, we want to continue working together with the Department of Education, the board, and the various educational stakeholders, such as the Connecticut Association of Public School Superintendents, the Connecticut Association of Boards of Education, and other education organizations where appropriate. Please continue to feel free to reach out to our association on issues of mutual interest. Thank you again for the opportunity to address the board.
Thank you. Thank you so much. The next item in the agenda is the consideration of the minutes. So I would need a motion.
So move. Second.
Second.
Okay. Any changes, corrections, amendments? Then all those in favor, raise your hand. Just raise your hand. Any,
Raise your hand up. Okay, thank you.
any opposed? Any abstentions? Thank you. We approve the minutes. The next item in the agenda is the report of the commissioner. As you know, the commissioner is right now in Washington testifying at 10 o'clock for his appointment as Secretary of Education. So I think it's only fair that we offer him our best wishes and let him know that we're thinking of him and knowing that he will do very well and that we will intend to watch attentively, maybe with popcorn later on CTN or in the whole hearing. But we're delighted and honored to have him being considered for Secretary of Education.
Here.
The next item, thank you. The next item of the agenda is really the motion to principles, procedures, and standards for the approval of private special education. So I will need a motion before we consider that report.
So move.
Second.
Okay.
Karen.
Thank you.
Who will be presenting that?
Brian Klimkowitz, our director, should be on, Brian, to share this report.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Lopez. Thank you, Deputy Commissioner Tucker. Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be with you this morning. Happy to answer any questions that you have, and I just have a very brief summary for you. Before you is the document for approval called Principles, Procedures, and Standards for the approval of private special education programs. I would like to thank Colleen Hales, the BSE consultant, for her leadership and continued management of this process, as well as Dory Papa, who's been assisting with this initiative over the last couple of years. And I'd also like to thank Jessa Myrtle and her team for their support and assistance in the revision of this important document. There are also several outside stakeholders, stakeholders outside of the State Department of Education that have contributed to this update. So I just wanted to highlight a few of those entities. One is CAPCEF, which is the professional organization for the approved private programs. CONCASE, our special education directors. CPAC, which is our parent training institute in the state. AFCAMP, as well as the Office of Child Advocate. So that's just to name a few of the outside stakeholders that have contributed to this revision process over the last couple of years. Just in summary, there are currently 89 schools that are categorized as APSEPs, which is the acronym that I'll use moving forward for private programs for special education. That there are a bit fewer programs because some of those schools are managed by one organization or entity, if you will. When individual education programs are created for students in the state, they're designed for their current needs. And at times, based on these PPT determinations, our local school districts are unable to implement those IEPs as written, given the intensity of needs of students. So they often seek assistance of APSEPs. In order to apply to become an approved program, you must be in operation for 1 year in the state and have served at least 10 students. At that point in time, there's a very rigorous process, which includes a 32-page application with approximately 20 attachments. The standards that are set forth in front of you today for approval is the document that summarizes all of the necessary components. Our responsibility is to ensure that those programs are in compliance with all federal laws as well as state laws and state statutes. To break down the process simply, there's a comprehensive review of that application, a 2-day site visit, and then a generated evaluation report, which results in either an approval, anywhere from 3 to 5 years for that program, a conditional approval, which is 1 year, and an approval that is withheld because of information that was obtained during the review. As I mentioned, I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. It has been some time since the last revision of this document, so we're very excited to have this updated, revised document in front of you this morning.
Thank you. Questions for Brian?
I have a question. Brian, what are the significant differences? What's changed?
Yeah, so there have been most of the changes from the previous document had to do with updated legislative requirements that have been in place. We also took care to ensure that the language within the document was updated for current best practice strategies. A specific example that I can give you is around supports for students in the social, emotional, and behavioral components of programs, the use of positive behavioral interventions, behavior intervention plans, and functional behavioral assessments. So those are the two main areas. We also updated, obviously, links, current links to our website. And so I would say between those three areas, that was the main focus for our update: legislative updates, best practice strategies and language, and then updated links and resources for our approved private programs.
Good. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Let me just, if I may, just
Sure, go
make a suggestion. Whenever you want to update things that change all the time, like links, you don't need to come to the board for approval of that. You know that, right?
Yes, thank you. We appreciate that. We know that the links and things are always changing and improving. And the reason that this document is before you today is because of the statutory requirements that the commissioner has moving forward, and because of the other more substantial changes around the legislative process.
Right.
But I do appreciate that, and we'll make sure that if there are adjustments that are needed to either links or resources, we would have your approval to do that on our own.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Yes, go ahead, Martha.
Are there newer requirements to required updates more frequently? Because 23 years is a long time.
Yeah, it's definitely a long time. What was long time in a coming, and we're very excited to have this document out today. And so we have a process internally where we'll be reviewing this on an annual basis. And anytime that there's any substantial changes that require the attention of the board, we would plan to do that. And we can keep you updated through perhaps one of your subcommittees to let you know of our progress of that on an annual basis.
That's good. Thank you.
Hey, Pete.
Anybody else? Questions? Brian, I want to thank you and the staff for updating this. And my question was similar to Alan. What was different? What was updated? So I appreciate your answer. I also wanted to sort of point out that one of the things that I particularly appreciated is that this document is very much aligned with what we're doing with charter schools and other entities in terms of the process of approval and reviewing and validating that the work that they're doing conforms with the policies that we have. So I appreciate that alignment among in all the different areas of the department, because I think that's that consistency is very helpful. So good. Then we do have the motion, so all that we need to do is sort of vote for approval. All those in favor, do we need a roll call? We can just raise our hand.
Yes, we can just raise our hands.
Okay, thank you. So
It's actually easier to ask if there's anybody opposed.
okay, okay.
Thank you.
So
I have the vote.
okay, thank you, Alan, and thank you everyone, and thank you, Brian, for presenting and doing this work. And we hope to see you not in 23 years, but.
Thank you very much. Much appreciated. We really appreciate the board's support in moving this forward, and we're excited to support the approved private programs as well as the local districts moving forward.
Yeah, no, that's really important document. And then we need a motion to consider the adoption of position statement on cultural responsive education.
So moved. Second.
Okay. Then Adrian Wood and Ingrid Kennedy will discuss it.
Dr. Wood, you're muted, Dr. Wood.
We can see Ingrid, but I don't.
Okay.
Good morning, Ingrid.
Good morning. Good morning. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I'm sorry about that. Good morning, Vice Chair Lopez, Deputy Commissioner Russell Tucker. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to present to you our revised position statement on culturally responsive education. It's been several years since the board has approved the position statement. And the reason that we're coming for you today is to re-emphasize our agency's position around the importance of making sure that we provide our students with a public educational system that reflects the diversity of our student population. My presentation will be brief because I want to spend some time allowing my other individual, Dr. Kennedy, to have an opportunity to talk about some of the things that she's been doing and her agency has been doing in collaboration with our agency around culturally responsive education. As I indicated, the Connecticut State Department of Education recognizes that there has been an ongoing need to address the changing demographics of our student population. And one of the best ways to do that is to have an educational system that reflects that diversity and encourages that diversity to be a primary part of our public educational system. One of the things that we've done most recently is spent a lot of time dealing with equity. The focus of this presentation by Dr. Kennedy will focus on that. But prior to getting to that piece, I would like to recognize and appreciate the support that was provided by our two board members as part of the committee, Mrs. Malia Sieg and Dr. Dubois Walton. I think with their, sorry, there's a little background noise. With their support, this has helped us really look at the things that we've done and determine what we need to do moving forward. I think the presentation that Dr. Kennedy will present will provide us with a better clarity around some of the things the agency has done in collaboration with CERC, as well as some of the things CERC has done independently at the request of public school districts. Dr. Kennedy?
Thank you so much, Dr. Wood. Good morning, Chairperson Taylor, Vice Chairperson Lopez, Deputy Commissioners Russell Tucker, and Deputy Commissioner Nesmith, and distinguished members of the board. This is actually my third consecutive time before you, so I'm just becoming just so comfortable with all of you. So thank you so much for the invitation again. And to Dr. Wood, thank you so much for the introduction and also for the emphasizing the collaboration. Just very, on behalf of the CERC Board of Directors and our staff, thank you for emphasizing that collaboration and the importance of what this statement that you have put forward. So what I would like to do, since some of you are new members to the board, I wanted to just provide you a brief historical perspective of CERC and your state education resource center. And I like to frame it that way because CERC is a quasi-public that was specifically identified to support the State Board of Education. So if we can move to the next slide. Thank you so much, Ajit, for your support. I wanted to introduce you to 1969, when the collaboration and partnership with the State Department of Education started between us. It was in 1969 that our partnership began as a result of our services to students with disabilities and their families. We started as the Special Education Resource Center. And this partnership has grown through the years in emphasizing our relationship. It's specifically how this entity that provided professional development to all of you, what is the identity of this entity? So if we move to the next slide, thank you. In 2014, that identity was defined clearly by our legislators, and they established that the purpose of the State Education Resource Center was to assist the State Board of Education in the provisions of programs and activities that will promote educational equity and excellence. And it's a list of activities that I would like to share with you. I'm a visual learner, and I wanted to present that to you visually. We can move to the next slide. I would like to focus on the 6 areas that the legislation indicates that we are to support you as you move forward with your vision of equity and excellence in education. And that is training, professional development, technical assistance, grant coordination, publications, research and evaluation, and maintaining the State Education Resource Center library. So through all these legislative obligations.
Welcome to the webinar. You have entered an attendee in listen-only mode.
So I'm sorry. So if we can move to the next slide, to expand for all of you what that looks like internally at CERC. Every single one of these areas is an area that we dedicated specifically to supporting all of the department's goals and objectives, in addition the school districts that call for the support. So our direct support to you also aligns with the direct support that we provide to the school districts. So what I would like to present to you and outline briefly is the link between the statement, your position statement that you are about to, that you are moving forward and approving today. If we can move to the next slide, please. This graph, it is regarding the fully executed contracts the CERC has received. And this is the school district directly calling CERC for our services. And as you can see, we have services specifically in the special education, SRBI, curriculum instruction, PBIS, racial equity. I want you to pay attention to the racial equity pie, section of the pie. If we can move to the next one, please. Now we are at 16%, and this is 1920. Can we go to the next one, please? This is from June 20 to January 2021. You probably can associate what is happening in here. Our school districts are really now calling and saying to us, we need, sir, your support, specifically to address institutionalized racism, equity, social justice. That is not to say that the other areas are not being addressed. Sir, we pride ourselves always that we look at a comprehensive system and we always go through the equity lens, everything that we do. But what you are seeing right now are school districts saying to us, we need you to come to us and support us. If we can go to the next slide, please. So as you continue to keep this in mind, the approval as we came to you on December of Public Act 1912, the Act concerning the inclusion of Black and Latino studies in the public schools curriculum. If I was to predict, but the trend that you're seeing, the request to support school districts, it is going to increase. We are already receiving phone call after phone call. They're not stopping. The statement that you're about to put forward, that you're about to approve, it is an indication of your commitment to what is happening not only in Connecticut, but nationally. Your State Education Resource Center, and I need to emphasize that our partnership, our collaboration, we were created to provide you with services to support you. Now the calls that we're receiving are nationally. We are working with national organizations because they're hearing regarding supports and services in our partnership with the State Department of Education. So today, we are very honored to be before you and presenting you a little bit of the history and also offering our services, the opportunity to be able to work with Dr. Wood and the members of the committee to review and provide our feedback regarding your position statement was one of the indications of enhancing our partnership and our collaboration moving forward. So with that said, thank you so much. And I know that you might have some questions for Dr. Wood and myself. Thank you so much. Another piece that I need to also just bring forward, I love when I'm called Dr. Kennedy. That not yet, I'm working towards, so I can say candidate for the doctoral program. So I just want to make sure I clarify. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Ingrid and Dr. Wood. Questions on the position statement? Any questions or comments?
I have a question, and that is when you mentioned, Ingrid, about you were getting a lot of calls from outside. What specific calls are folks calling about?
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Resco. There is specifically about providing support in professional development, how to engage educators in courageous conversations, how to address disparities, how to prepare the students to be able to engage in the conversations regarding what they are witnessing through this pandemic, what the media is presented. Many of the questions that calls that we receive immediately, as you can see by the chart that I've provided, after the May 25th incident, after George Floyd, our phones were nonstop, our email calls from superintendents of schools. And this is something that we are very honored to do, because being able to engage in really discreet and confidential conversations with how support superintendents of schools, how they are able to really engage in these conversations, how do they grow their own racial consciousness and to be able to really support their school districts and their staff and their students.
And the other side of me, after hearing what the calls were about, I was thinking about even the parental involvement. Because a lot of, as we know, a lot of education starts at home. So therefore, what is it that CERT is doing to engage parents when it comes to these particular issues that are impacting our society overall?
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Resco, for the follow-up question. We are we actually work with Deputy Commissioner Russell Tucker, in addition to Judy Carson, on developing sessions specifically for families. The last session that we had, we received, I can say, almost 300 questions. There was an hour session that we put together. So we are developing a series of follow-up questions that address the questions provided by the families. Social emotional has become at the top. Families asking, how do we support our children? And one of the things that actually, and I would like to highlight this, because now through everything that it is going through, that we are going through the pandemic and the virtual learning, is developing the bridge between the families and the educators. The families realize the educators' level of effort in order to be able to support their children. And the educators now realize they need the collaboration they have to take place within both. And one of the comments that it was made in one of these sessions was one parent asking, how can I support my son's teacher? That was the question. And it's how can I support? And that alone, it began to really move us in the direction of those bridges and accentuating the partnership between the school and the families. So we continue to do that in small groups of sessions for families specifically. Also, we're developing sessions on the family's language, so that they can actually have access to the information in their language to feel comfortable to ask the questions. They don't have to be a translator in the middle. It's directly to them.
Thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions? Donald? Don?
Yeah, Ingrid, thank you for being on this call. This is Don Harris from Bloomfield. And also, in my role as president of CAPE, we're doing a lot in the area of diversity, equity, and inclusion. There's no question, CERC is a leader out there in providing professional development opportunities. But, also, CREC is doing some things with, is there any thought to combining efforts? So, you can go here, you can go there, you can go to one central agency, the CERC, and, we can everybody can feed in as an advantage for the state.
Thank you so much, Dr. Harris, for that question. So the way that I would like to answer that is two ways. One of them is the distinction between the regional education centers and CERC. The regional education centers serve their particular school districts. CERC was created in legislation to support the State Board of Education in all across the state. So we now, with this particular need that we have, the need is so great that as each one of us begin to assess the needs of the particular areas, how do we make sure that those areas are supported? So to that point, I would also like to emphasize, as you see the growth that's taking place, your point about how do we centralize the capacity of the state, that is one of the pieces that is something for the state to consider, for you as a board. How do we centralize those services so that we can build capacity across the state that is consistent, that the message is consistent regarding the courageous dialogue that needs to happen in order to first enhance the racial identity and consciousness of our educators so that they now begin to move that into the classrooms. Your position statement, when it talks about the responsibilities of every stakeholder, this is not just the responsibility of the State Department of Education. This is not just the responsibility of our educators. This is not just the responsibility of our teachers. It's all of our responsibility. So begin to increase that so that we can really address the demand. And I'm coming to you with this information, and I wanted to provide you with those graphs so that you can see how quickly the demand is increasing, and emphasize the fact that CERC, we have for many years supported the state, but we are a very small organization. We are a mighty team of 43 individuals. So having the regional education centers also continue to provide the supports and services is essential, because CERC cannot cover every single request that we are receiving. So we are going to need collaboration, and I encourage us to think about how to best do that, develop that collaboration. Thank you for that question.
Thank you.
If I'm-
Any other
if I
comments,
might?
Karen? Go ahead.
Yes. So one, I would just like to commend the team that worked on this, and thank you for allowing Malia and I to weigh in on this and play a role in drafting it. I'd like to just call attention for my fellow board members here. A couple of things that stand out to me about the statement. We are in this statement taking making a bold statement that is both anti-racist and anti-bias. And I think that's important to highlight and to call out. And I want to echo what Dr. Kennedy was just saying about, I'm sorry, what Ms. Kennedy was just saying about, I want to make you that, was just saying about the clear guidelines that are there for the steps for the state board to be taking, steps for each school district to take, expectations at the school level, at the teacher and school staff level, at the higher ed level, and importantly, I think to Wilda's question earlier, there are family and community expectations that are clearly called out in the statement, and importantly, call out for our learners, for our students. So I think it's a very comprehensive statement. I think it takes a step forward from where we had been with the previous statement, and I do urge the support of my colleagues on this.
Thank you. Thank you, Karen. I wanted to thank you and Malia for collaborating. And I also wanted to point out that February being African American History Month, and we had not done anything specific, it's only appropriate that we consider today and approve this statement because it is a powerful way of honoring African American History Month and recognizing, the importance of having a cultural responsive education in all the schools in Connecticut. So I truly appreciated, the work. This statement is a beautiful statement. It's not only powerful, but it's beautifully written. So thank you so much. Any other comments or questions before I call Charlene? Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Vice Chair. I also wanted to add certainly appreciation from the department for the partnership in doing this, and for the board's support as well. Upon approval, if so done with this position statement, the department will certainly be getting it out to the field and incorporating it in the work that we're doing. I should also add, with the collaborations with CERC, that I am certainly heartened that not only are folks asking for this support, but there's more and more of them districts doing that as a community approach. So it is not just the school district asking for it, but there's some of them, Ingrid, and I know they've come forward as a community. So it's the school district, it's their city hall, it's local, right? So it's folks coming together and recognize that this effort cannot be isolated in our school buildings or in our districts, but it is a part of a community dialogue. So there's more and more of that happening, and so happy from the agency to continue to collaborate and support that. And to Don's point, when I know I've had conversations with CAVE, and knowing the work that is happening at CERC really will serve to try to connect and align those efforts as necessary, because it is such an important part of the work that we're doing together. Thank you.
Wonderful, wonderful. Are we ready for a vote?
Malia has her hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry, Malia, go ahead, please.
Thanks. I actually wanted to just build off of what Dr. Russell Tucker was just saying, and building it, and really encouraging us as a state really to broaden beyond the education spectrum. And in committee, I had mentioned that in the state of Oregon, it was the education department that really took a lead in putting forth a similar sort of statement several years ago, and then it ended up sort of spreading to beyond just Department of Education and other departments as a way to also focus their energies. And I am hoping that there is provided here an opportunity for other state agencies to look at this as well, and think about how that can the same sort of attention can be provided to their work.
Awilda, did you raise your hand? Yeah.
Yes, I just wanted to briefly convey that working in an institution of higher ed, CERC has reached out to many institutions of higher ed. Okay, they've participated with a diverse group of students in terms of racial, how to handle situations. And so I have to commend them, because years ago they had approached me, and every year they come around and say, what can we do to bring in some of these issues that are happening on college campuses? So thank you for the work you do, and it's made a big impact on our students of color. So thank you.
Thank you so
Thank
much, Dr. Rose. Thank you. So if I also, Dr. Lopez and Chairperson Taylor, if I can actually, before you, just to add to what it was expressed, Deputy Commissioner Russell Tucker, I want to mention to all of you that the work that is happening, the effort, I don't like to call it work, the effort that is happening at the community level. Right now, we have a couple of communities, they have taken this, not just at the school level, but with all members of the stakeholders. Sutherland Public Schools put together the Sutherland Coalition for Social Justice. Wethersfield, right now, last night, I was just with the Wethersfield Coalition for Social Justice. Almost 70 members of the community coming together to address issues of equity and social justice. Our motto at SERV is, we go and support a school district with the goal to get ourselves out of the job. We want to build capacity. If we begin to build capacity in these coalitions and social justice organizations, the movement continue for a level of accountability and responsibility in which each member of that group that it was mentioned in the statement that you put in forward take responsibility and accountability of change and healing, because it translates to our children and their families. So again, thank you so much for this opportunity, and thank you for the bold statement that you continue to make regarding what is important in Connecticut, that is about our children and our families, and that it's not about a zip code, it's not about the color of our skin, it's about opportunity and access that it needs to be created for each and every one of our students and their families. So thank you so much. Know the SERV is here to serve you and support you. Thank you.
Okay, all those in favor, raise your hand. Okay. Any opposed? Any abstention? Bravo, thank you so much. And Alan, the next item of the agenda is the report of the chair. So I'm passing the baton to you. I think that's the next item. And then the next, after you will be Charlene, will be talking about financial issues. So if you want to continue now that I see you, and I'm glad to see you, so go ahead. Thank you.
Yes, I will learn how to do this smoothly some year, maybe.
Okay.
The chair has been hunkered down and has nothing to report, except that he is looking forward greatly to what I hope will be an in-person meeting, even if we're sitting spread out all over the room next month, because I think with kids back in school that it is time that we be back in at least the same building. But that's obviously open for discussion, and we'll all see how the world is looking in a few weeks. Nothing else. I understand there are no financial matters.
But
no...
Charlene will give a report. Charlene will address that area.
Okay.
We will do it on the agency report in a few minutes.
Okay. So we're on to items for discussion, which is agency update. You're on, Charlene.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you very much. I have my colleagues. I know Kathy Dempsey will be joining for this conversation as well, along with Deputy Commissioner Desi Naismith. So at the last board meeting, board members, that we shared information, Kathy Dempsey did, on the funding received under the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund, which we call ESSER. And so today we'll provide you with more details. You also received in the mail last week the allocations, a cover memo, and also a priorities document that we sent out to districts. Desi mentioned earlier that we also had a meeting yesterday with superintendents around funding. So today we will give you some further updates around the ESSER funding. We'll also share with you about reopen plans and support, information about our school and districts accountability, some updates on attendance and engagement, and FAFSA challenge. So with that, we'll get started with the ESSER update. I'll turn it over to Kathy.
Good morning, everyone. I hope everybody's well and dug out at this point. I have snow drifts that are taller than me, which I haven't seen in a while. But as Charlene said, yesterday we had the opportunity to talk with our superintendents and their school business officials, and we actually consciously made the decision to have the superintendents include their school business officials to make sure that they both were hearing the same information as they start doing their planning to utilize these funds. So Connecticut received $492 million in additional funding under ESSER 2. Of that, we need to distribute 90% of the funds to the local school districts, which means we will be reserving about $49 million at the state level for statewide activities. Between Connecticut's ESSER 1 funding and the ESSER 2 funding, we have now received over $603 million in elementary and secondary school emergency relief funds. So we've got some money. I don't think I ever say when I join you. Usually I'm saying, oh, they cut our budget now. But so we're excited about the fact that our districts will have some funding in order to enable them to do the things that they need to do to help students return to the building and, recover their any educational loss. One important thing is that, and because there seems to be some confusion about this, is that distribution of the ESSER funding is based upon the district's Title I allocation, and it's the Title I allocation that they had in fiscal year 20. That's set in the law, so the department does not have discretion over that. But for some reason, there seemed to be a lot of confusion, so I thought it'd be helpful to, in case you get questions, for you to be aware of that. The other big difference this time from ESSER 1 is that LEAs do not need to reserve funding for equitable services. Equitable services is the provision of either services or purchasing of items to non-public schools. There is a separate pool of funding that is coming through the governor's Emergency Education Relief Fund, CARE. Everything has an acronym. But there's a pool of about $15 million that will be distributed, and the department is responsible for the distribution to non-public schools. So that was the other, that was a big change from ESSER 1. And I think we're ready to move on. I'm going to turn it back to Charlene and Desi to talk about our state-level priorities.
Thank you, Kathy. Desi?
Thank you. So one of our first state level priorities that we have shared with you all and communicated with the field is academic supports to address the learning loss and the needs of learning recovery for our students. Part of our expectation is that districts will measure where their kids are and really target the most vulnerable populations. We know from our monthly data collections who those kids are, and districts know as well who they need to target. And we've messaged that we want all options on the table here. Things such as extending the school day, extending the school year, summer opportunities, extending those summer opportunities beyond the kids you would traditionally invite in. And so in order to receive this money, we've communicated these priorities to our districts because we want them to target and make sure that this financial support is being spent towards the kids that we know are the most vulnerable right now, and the kids who absolutely need those academic recovery services the most. And so we also internally have a team here at the SDE that we've set up that is going to be putting together some learning recovery supports that our districts are also able to utilize so that they are not doing this work alone. We are also looking at what is out there nationally. We have one of our partner organizations, CCSSO, is doing some scans for us in this area, along with looking at what other states are doing as everybody is grappling with how to address other learning loss. But we felt it was critical when this federal money came down, that we put some priorities around it, and this being a key priority for us to help bridge the gap between what our kids need to know and how they've been doing academically in this pandemic. Charlene?
And additionally, to certainly connect with that, we know how important family and community connections are. So that is the other priority area that we've included. We've called out specifically the need for our districts to work with like the faith-based organizations and businesses or social service providers to provide the added support for our students and families as we're addressing learning loss and learning recovery and acceleration. So that is an area that we, as you know, we have guidance and information here that we certainly will be sharing with the field and really helping to broker some of those conversations and connections locally as we have. We'll speak later to that, even when we talk about our discipline report, that is so critical. So we know family and community connections are important. We've even spoken to the issue of family academies that can be, I know that there's family universities and those already that's out there in certain parts of the state, but how do we make sure we focus on supporting the whole family, right? Supporting the whole student is also supporting the family. So family and community connections is the other priority area. Next slide. The third priority area is, to no surprise, continuing to look at school safety and certainly social and emotional well-being of the whole student, and also support for our school staff, which we know is so critically important. And we've already signaled additional supports that we're providing at the state agency. You'll hear more about it in a little while, however, but we've procured a social and emotional learning tool that can be used statewide so that locally districts will not have to purchase their own tool or mechanism to assess students' social emotional health or well-being, that they can use the tool that we've procured in order to do that, to assess and to then be able to provide the additional mental health, trauma-informed support for our students as well. And certainly, as I mentioned, supporting our school staff, also critically important, as they're also in the throes and in the front lines of this pandemic and providing the supports to our students. Desi?
So another priority area for us, as you all know, we've done a lot of work around closing the digital divide in Connecticut with the devices and the hotspots and the broadband vouchers. But one of the things that we have heard, frankly, directly from families themselves, as Charlene and I have met with many different groups around this issue, is the need for additional support in this area. It's one thing to be able to provide a device and the connectivity, and that's great, but that's only the first step. So we are making sure that we let the field know what we're looking for in terms of additional supports that need to be provided, particularly for teachers and for families in the area of remote learning. And I can't overstate that enough, because that is something that I think sometimes it's easy to forget, that as we got thrust into this new digital virtual world that we've been living in for the past year, we shouldn't assume that everybody was ready to adapt and has the tools and the knowledge to know how to do that. And so we felt it was very important that we call this out as a priority, particularly here around professional development for both our teachers and again, our families, because this is what Charlene and I hear directly from them as a need here. And that's why we felt strongly that this needed to be one of our state level priorities for this second round of federal funding. Charlene?
Thank you very much. Next slide. So what's next? I'll turn to Kathy, and then we will answer your questions, board members, around this funding.
Okay. Ajit, could we have the next slide up?
Give me a moment.
I guess there wasn't a next slide. Okay. So what's next? At the department, we are in the midst of developing our online ESSER application for the districts to access those funds. The application will be more robust than the application that we did for ESSER 1, in terms of that we are asking districts to provide more information about the planning and their intended use of the funds. And for one, a lot of the funding was needed to procure PPE. It was needed to support substitute staff, additional staff in the social work, mental health area. So in this, with these this round of funds, given that we are shifting somewhat to, when the students are back in the building, the learning recovery piece, we're asking for a more detailed application. Internally, we are setting up an application review and technical assistance team. Obviously, we don't want our districts to think that they have to go it alone. We have let them know that as additional information becomes available, we will be sharing that with them. In terms of important dates for our districts, they have, in addition to SR1 funding, they also have, I don't know if you recall, the governor dedicated $126 million in coronavirus relief funds to our school districts. So as of February 1st, and this has been communicated to each district that still has a balance, we have a little over $70 still available in coronavirus relief funds for them to draw down on. And they still have close to $62 million ESSER1 funding available to them. So we have asked them to prioritize as part of their planning, figuring out, how they will draw down the funding that they currently still have available to them. And as Charlene likes to remind them, this also includes their title funds. We have districts that have still have sizable balances of title funds available to them to draw down. So we are working in collaboration with them to utilize all the funding sources to maximize the services that they can provide to the students. So our work will continue. Charlene?
Yeah, thank you, Kathy. And so the last thing I'll say around the funding, in the priorities document that you received, you'll notice that we also have a list of federally sanctioned uses of the funds, and new for ESSER 2 includes some school facility repairs and improvements needed to reduce risk of virus transmission and other maintenance kind of work that that may be necessary. So that's there as well. We just focused on those big buckets that we shared with you as priorities, but there's the ability for them to use funds in that manner as well. So before we move on to the next update, Chair Taylor, we'll just pause here to see what questions you board members have regarding the funding and the priorities.
Are there questions? Erin?
Okay, I didn't hear you, Alan. Yeah, I do. Kathy, in your discussions with the superintendents, did anything come up about their concern? I mean, this money that they're receiving is great, obviously, but did anything come up with their concern of what will happen with their budgets moving forward? I know being involved in my Meriden's district, so often, anytime we received any kind of additional funding, our city council just simply cut us for the exact amount we received. And so therefore we ultimately received nothing. We couldn't move forward. I wonder if that came up because I think of when we had the situation with the problem in Puerto Rico, and funding came up for those who had students, and that happened to some of our districts, and we saw some districts get into some serious trouble. That one district in particular that came before us, where the city was, it was taking back funds from the Board of Ed. I was just wondering if that came up, and if I imagine it's a concern still out there.
Yes, it is. We've had several superintendents raise that. I've had several superintendents raise that concern with me, particularly because ESSER 2 does not have a local maintenance of effort requirement, so I think that there is a misunderstanding that that means that those funds could potentially be available to cover what would be normal local operating costs. The key to this, and I think it's very important for superintendents and their boards when communicating with the municipal side, is that all of these funds have to be committed to activities that are covering the needs that have arisen because of COVID. So, if you're looking to cover the cost of teachers that you already have, that is not going to be an eligible expenditure under this. So I think that provides some protection to our districts in that it is very specific how these funds, what they must be used for and in what manner. And the other thing that I remind the superintendents too is that the minimum budget requirement statute still stands. And so there are limits within that as to the municipalities' ability to reduce local Board of Education budgets. And they're limited to very specific circumstances. And in our alliance districts, they actually are not allowed to reduce their minimum budget from the prior year. So I think those two things are some safety nets for districts as they confront the local fiscal pressures that have arisen because of the pandemic and work on their budgets with the town side.
Right. And then I have I have a couple of questions actually, but my other question is, Desi, you made reference to the innovative ways that, and I love the list that was sent out, in particular, the extended day, because I've gotten a lot of questions on that since that list went on. My involvement in Meriden, I was part of with the AFT opening 3 extended day schools in Meriden. Unfortunately, because of funding in the last 2 years, and just this past year because of the pandemic, all 3 of those schools closed and went back to a regular type of school day. They were wonderful, wonderful opportunities for kids. However, the funding was a concern. So I wonder, like so many districts would love to do this because it is just such a great opportunity, but will they be able to do that and move it beyond a year with funding?
Yeah, Aaron, I think that's a really good point, because what we know, and part of the messaging here is that this is not money in perpetuity. This is not going to be around forever. And so looking at ways to target, extended day, it depends on a couple of things, right? It depends on the nature of the district and their ability to sort of set that up financially. The other thing, to Kathy's point earlier, is that the amounts are sort of set, right? We can't just say, okay, we're gonna shuffle money or move money around from district to district. So they are going to be confined to a certain extent by the amount that is afforded them. And so I think as they look at that, part of it is looking at the short term, the next year to 2 years, and what you can do with that. And really, Aaron, balancing that with what makes sense for your district, because they're not going to be able to do everything on that list. So they're going to have to prioritize what makes the most sense for the kids in their district in their own individual unique situations, versus looking at how long that they can do that. And so I think that, short term, this is probably something that some districts are going to be able to explore based on the amount that they get. But to your point, long term, this money may not be the long term solution to keep that going on. And districts may have to look at other means. The other thing, Aaron, is we don't know what, if any, additional financial support will be coming out of Washington from the federal level. So I think now, as people look at extended day as a possibility, they'd be wise to look at it in the short term, given the time limitations on the money here. And maybe while they're doing that, they can look at some other long-term sustainability possibilities as well.
And let me add to that, great points that Desi made, and thank you for the question, Aaron. We're also working to provide some flexibilities around existing title funds. You heard Kathy mention that. I know John is on. We have a really specific example because the federal government is allowing us some flexibility around some of the use of the title funding can then be leveraged and used differently to then provide that boost and support and then connect it to some of the new funding that may go away. John can share a very quick example about what we're doing in the after school space to address that issue. John?
Thank you, Charlene. Good morning, board members. Yeah, so we have a number of after-school programs that are out there. The state provides under the priority school district funding, extended school building hours as a part of that. We also have the state after-school funding. And Charlene's referring to the 21st Century Community Learning Centers, which is the Title IV federal after-school program, which is on order of about $10 million annually to support these programs. So I think what programs and districts can do is they've already stood up these programs to serve a limited number of students based on their funding, and they can now use this funding to expand the opportunities for more students and more schools to participate in after-school programming. And the flexibilities that are allowed are not specific to after school anymore. They can use them during the school day to support students, monitoring students, making sure they're engaged, helping them with technology, helping them with tutoring, all of those things in real time during the school day. And we shouldn't even be calling it an after school program anymore under current circumstances, because it really is all hands on deck and supports in all hours of the day.
Do districts have to use this money by June 30th in order to avoid it reverting somehow to the towns, or is there more flexibility?
So, Chair Taylor, for the ESSER 1 funding, they have through 9/30 of 2022. For the new funding that just came in, they have the ESSER 2 funding. They have until September 30th of 2023 to obligate the funds, and so they are not going anywhere. So they've got a little time.
Good.
I have just one more question.
I have a comment. Charlene, thank you so much for this update, and thank you to Kathy, Desi, and the whole team for providing us with very specific information. I hope that you will continue to update us in every meeting what is happening, and I think my concern is that the funding is being utilized appropriately. There's no funding is left not being used. And also on the learning recovery, how is it being approached and what is going to happen? So what I want to make sure happens is that we are very supportive of the strategies being promoted by the department, and any need to emphasize our support and for the department and the implementation of the strategies, we need to be present and manifested. So again, thank you for doing this, and I look forward to getting regular updates.
Thank you, Chair.
Estella, that sort of leads into my last question again for, actually for Desi and Charlene. Connecticut is certainly known now across the nation about our digital divide. And a lot of people are asking, I'm sure you're getting a lot of questions on how Connecticut was so successful and what we've done so far. With that in mind, and we still have ways to go, in particular, I like that you brought up the PD situation, Desi, the family engagement. Those two things are so key in this digital divide. We can't say, here's your laptop, you're good to go. I mean, it doesn't work that way. But I think back at what the board, we made some decisions, that we started discussing, quite frankly, last July. And two of them was to, give districts 3 days for PD to get ready to open the school year. And so we changed the year from 180 to 177. And then our second, for those districts who were in really good place and felt that they didn't want to lose any more time during a snow day, who knew this would be so controversial, but because all kids go out and play in the snow. I didn't know that either. My kids used to just go back and go to sleep. But anyways, that a possibility that, we had to, those were special moves that we made. Would that be something that we would perhaps look into doing again, in particular to the PD, if we were to say to districts, we will give you some days solely for this, knowing that when we open fully, hopefully for a full school year next year, but it's probably going to be very much needed because I don't see them really getting it in now in the middle of everything. So is that a possibility?
So that is such
That might be a Laura issue too. I don't know what Laura's on because it's probably legislative.
Yeah, no,
too. I mean, it's legislative.
it's a great question, Erin, for all the points. Right now, we know there's legislative proposals looking at remote learning. We are beginning to get questions from superintendents and from families, on both sides of this. Families that said, this remote learning has worked so well for my child. I hope I can continue that next year. And districts are saying, wait a minute, what will we be able to do as a part of their planning forward? So it is very much an active conversation right now as to what things are going to look like. At the same time, with our state health, thinking about what does the next month look like, right? As we're looking at all the public health measures around group sizes and all those kinds of things are part of the conversation as well. So I guess the short answer is, Erin, it's a great question and one that we're now proactively beginning to engage in some conversation. We'll certainly be engaging the board as we go forward with this thinking. Desi?
Yeah, Charlene, I think you really nailed it there, Erin. I think at this point, everything's on the table right now. I don't think we're looking at taking anything off the table right now. Given that it's early February, it's hard to sort of project where we'll be next week versus 6 months from now. But definitely, we noted those are the types of things that we need to be considering. And again, we're not ready to take any possibility off the table, not knowing where we're going to end up. So we hear you, and it's something that we will look into as we move forward towards this spring and closing out the school year to get ready for the fall.
Okay. Thank you. The update was wonderful. I agree with everything Estella said. Thank you so much.
Bob? Bob, you're muted, I think.
Sorry about that. Kathy did a great job of kind of explaining that the cities can't kind of say, well, now you got this extra money, we can cut your budget, or we can cut the amount that we're paying you. The suggestion is that some information or a directive go out or a letter go out to all the cities and towns in the state indicating just that, so that they're put on notice that that's a no-no. And as opposed to trying to undo something that they've done, is try to prevent it from happening in the first place.
Is there any communication going out, Kathy?
So that actually is an excellent point. I will discuss after this with Charlene and Desi whether or not it makes sense for us to send some kind of a communication, or the Office of Policy and Management directly engages the municipality, so we may be able to approach them about a suggested way of communicating this.
Great, thanks.
Other questions?
Chair Taylor?
Yes.
It's Karen. So thank you for this report and this information. I know that the department does a balancing job around its ability to collect the information that's needed for its purposes and trying not to be overly bureaucratic. So I get concerned a little bit when I hear that the application for funding is going to be more detailed than it's been in the past, recognizing the need for information. I want to ask whether districts have been involved in that process of discussing what kind of application, and I would encourage that there be a iterative process there to try to come up with something that's workable for districts and meets the department's need around data collection around the application.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Chair Taylor? Yes, I do agree with Karen because I wrote the word accountability because if I heard there are two dates, that the 9/30/22 and then the September 2022. Am I correct on those dates? We should be looking at as to what types of projects were more successful, so that we can have a better understanding of how to better measure this and hold people accountable, because we're talking federal monies. And so that's that. And number two is, has there been a conversation with providing some of these federal funding monies as incentives to our kids? I mean, because all I hear is, I'm hearing different types of, professional development, CPAC, et cetera. Is that allowable? Has that been discussed, so that our students receive some kind of a level of motivation to want to stay, whether it's after school now, because I'm picturing them after school with COVID. That's going to be kind of tough to see. We're trying to get them in school. So my question is, has there been a conversation if these monies could be used to provide a stipends for our kids and families?
Whoa.
I know.
So I think that's a very interesting idea. Based on my initial read of the ESSER 2 language, I don't know that would be an eligible expenditure under it, but we can certainly look at that a little bit further. In response to the concern about the application being, because I think, yes, if anything, frankly, we try not to be over bureaucratic. And given that government has trouble doing that, and we instinctively seem to do that. But I would say this about the application: the bulk of the application will be the exact same as it was for ESSER 1, which was very streamlined, and it was easy for them. They could quickly turn it around. I think that the piece that's going to be different, and we're not talking about something that will be a substantial commitment of time, but it's that they will have to identify a plan. So, typically what under ESSER 1, they just provided us with a budget, and that these were the activities they would spend the funding on. And given that these funds, for most people, for most districts, we're talking about them accessing it coming, later this school year through the summer into early next fall. We would like them to do some thinking around what strategies that they would use in order to, achieve the educational recovery. It is our hope that this information, while not asking for huge onerous amounts of it, will allow us to, on a more regular basis, communicate with them about which of these strategies are successful, because then we will be able to, and Charlene and Desi can speak much more eloquently than I can about this, but then we will be able to share the strategies that are working amongst the districts. And if we find a district that is having difficulty in executing a strategy, which can lead to them leaving money on the table, it will give us again an opportunity to offer some technical assistance. So the idea wasn't to create something onerous; it was to give us a little bit more information up front, so that we could be more helpful in how that information is shared and used amongst all the districts.
Thank you, Kathy. That sounds very appropriate. My only suggestion would be to involve districts in that process up front, so that they have some buy-in to the process, and you get ahead of any criticism that it's an onerous burden coming from on high. But no, this is something we developed collaboratively, and we might pick up some good stuff from the districts also in that discussion.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Chair Taylor, this is Martha. I think Kathy just answered my question, but I wanted to clarify that if a district was interested in developing programs for this summer for their populations of students, there's still enough time to do that, correct?
Absolutely. They probably those are the types of things they would be working on now, and too as they're doing their local budget setting. So the provision of the information, which is one of the reasons why, even though the application isn't ready yet, we released the allocation amounts, was we wanted districts to have time to plan, particularly since most of them are in the midst of their local budget setting. So, yep, they have plenty of time in order to be able to execute something this summer.
Okay, excellent. And I also just wanted to add that I really appreciate the document that I went out last week and the presentation today and this discussion. A lot of my questions were answered, and I think it's important for all of the stakeholders, parents, districts, everybody in Connecticut to be engaged in this ongoing discussion about how we're going to move forward from the situation with our students.
Thank you, Martha. Thank you for that recognition. We've shared the deck with superintendents yesterday, and we spoke to them, and then we will be able to share this with other stakeholder groups as well, to the point that you're making. We've gotten a lot of interest from legislators. We shared the allocation and the priorities document with them last week when this was distributed, so that everyone, the entire stakeholder community, knows what's there, what the priorities are, and got really positive feedback, even from like behavioral health providers who say, we've signaled the work. They can now connect locally with their district to try to have some conversations about planning forward. So we certainly intend to do that, certainly in keeping you abreast of where we are. To Kathy's point in responding to Dr. DuBois-Walton, is the need for us to make sure that we're supporting our districts as much as possible. And the application, I think, will allow us to do that. We've heard from superintendents who are already thinking about instituting programs even before summer comes along. So they are eager to get the planning going locally.
Is there any fiscal year kind of deadline on when they have to obligate their money?
So for ESSER 1, they have to obligate it by September 30th, 2022. They then have 90 days to actually expend it. For ESSER 2, the date is 9/30/2023, with then 90 days following that to actually finish the expenditure. So there's some time. We have some time.
Good. Any other questions or comments? Thank you all for shepherding this through. It's such a massive set of new issues on top of all of the ordinary massive set of issues. It's quite remarkable effort. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Taylor. So we'll move on to continue our agency updates for you. And thank you, Kathy and team that's working on this. And as Kathy mentioned, we also now have the $15 million amounts for non-public schools that we're going to need to set up systems for. So just so you understand the capacity needs in moving forward. So our next update is on reopening plans and support. Desi?
Thank you. So a couple other pieces of information we wanted to share with you. As we look at our districts and we look at the districts that have been out for an extended period of time, Charlene, myself, and Special Advisor Chris Clouet have begun to meet with those superintendents and their board chairs to have informal conversations around what supports do you need? What's your sort of reopening plan? What are you looking at in terms of when you think you'll be able to provide an in-school option for kids, all at the same time while we continue to encourage our districts to work with local health, as we have been saying all along, to make those decisions. And in these meetings, we've been talking about in-person learning opportunity for students, learning recovery, and the focus on kids who are particularly vulnerable, that have been out and haven't had access to in-school learning, and how the superintendents and the boards are working together to address some of those needs, as well as communication. Because one of the things that we know is that it's important that our districts are getting communication out to our families and our stakeholders on their plans around reopening. Next slide, please. And one of the positive things I wanted to share here is this is just a quick snapshot of the week of January 19th to the 22nd, compared to last week. And just quickly, the main takeaway here is that over 87% of our districts are currently offering some type of in-school opportunity for our kids who are either in hybrid or fully back in, predominantly. So I wanted the board to know that a lot of work is going into working with districts around this issue. And we have additional meetings set up. We have another subset of meetings set up for charter schools. And those meetings will involve Lisa Lomenzo, myself, and Chris Clouet as we look at how to support the charters, because as you know, charters are part of our districts. And so there's got to be some collaboration there to make sure that they're on the same page when it comes to certain services that kids need that are going to charter schools. So we have a very targeted approach to doing this. And I'm just very pleased at this point that we're looking at about 87% of our districts that are offering some type of in-person learning. And we will continue to work on this week to week as we work to support our districts in giving kids that opportunity. Charlene?
Thank you, Desi. And you know, before we move to the other updates, we'll certainly take your questions here. And I appreciate the efforts, and we'll just publicly appreciate our superintendents and our school leaders for the work that they're doing. As you know, they're doing this with safety first. So we're also in the midst of identifying if there are cases, addressing, doing contact tracing and quarantining as necessary, and just working with their whole community through this process. So it is a lift, but as you can see that they're doing very well in making sure an in-school option is available for our students. Any questions on that before we move on?
No questions.
Hearing none, we'll move on. Desi, accountability.
Yeah. So I'm going to turn it over to Ajit to give you the update on the accountability waiver and what that means for Connecticut. Ajit.
Thanks, Desi. Basically, what this means is with all the work that we have done in the past year, really, we're almost coming up on a year since we went fully remote last March. We've been doing a lot of work to close the digital divide, put out guidance, track attendance this year, and all the work that we've been doing. We're coming up now at the end of this year on our state assessments, which we didn't do last year, right? The U.S. Department of Education canceled our assessment and accountability last year, but the assessment part is coming around this year. But we've taken the stance from the very beginning that while we must assess to know where our students are so that we can use that for planning for the future, this is not the year to hold schools and districts accountable in a formal way. We're already holding them, if you will, accountable by looking at what learning models they're offering that Desi was speaking about. We'll be speaking momentarily about all the attendance efforts that are going on. So the state assessment really comes around at the end to track where our learning is. But we've been clear from the very beginning that this is not the year to hold schools and districts accountable, not the year to issue summative ratings, not the year to do school categories and that type of thing. So we should do it from the student learning standpoint, but not from a school accountability standpoint. The U.S. Department of Education provided us with a vehicle. They called it an addendum to the state plan that we have with them. So they provided that vehicle for us to request that flexibility. And after some public comment, we have now submitted that flexibility to the U.S. Department of Education and are waiting to hear back on what happens with that. So that's kind of the brief update on assessment and accountability, school and district accountability for this year.
Questions? Ajit, in the public comment, was there any significant opposition to taking that approach?
Yeah, I think this is a space that continues to evolve. There are people who feel that perhaps we shouldn't even administer the assessment this year with all the changes. Again, that type of waiver is currently not on the table. And I think some of that sentiment, sadly, comes from a history of how assessment results have been used in improper ways. historically. So we've sort of tried to reaffirm that the purpose of the state assessment, really in any year, but especially this year, is to know how our students are learning on our state standards. Our state assessments are the highest quality measures that we have on how our students are learning on those standards. And again, we've been very clear that this is not the year to do school and district accountability in the traditional sense. Even reporting of results should look different this year. And we're committed to working with our districts to do that. So, again, the feds have given us the vehicle to do an accountability modification, waiver, flexibility, and we have taken advantage of that to sort of relieve that big stressor of school ratings and so on that stem partially from the assessment results.
Thank you. Aaron.
Desi, Ajit, thank you so much for bringing up that piece about perhaps this will be the year that we truly start using those assessments the way they were meant to be used. They are important. Speaking as a 8th grade language arts teacher for many years, it is what we waited to see what my 7th graders coming in were, because it was just such vital information. And I hope, and it doesn't make any difference of the pandemic, that it doesn't make any difference where they are, if they went down, if there was growth. We're going to see growth in kids. And I think we're going to be amazed in seeing some growth in kids that perhaps we never saw in before, because their comfort level of remote learning is their comfort level. Who knows? But my question is, what about the schools? What if they are not in? Now, I think we have everybody in that would be in the testing category at this point. But say something were to happen and a school would have to close and it was the testing window, so to speak. How would they be able to conduct those tests not in in the 4 walls?
So 2 thoughts on that. One is that our messaging from the very beginning has been, first thing is that these tests have a window, like you mentioned, right? So our state assessment, academic assessment window starts in late March and goes through early June. So it's like a April, May, and June, like a good 10-week odd window, if you will. And so there is some level of flexibility. If there is a case and you got to shut down, you can potentially delay that to the subsequent week. So there is some flexibility within the testing window. The second thing is that we have built remote, not only remote administration of the state assessment, but also remote proctoring of the state assessment. So this is a brand new area for us and for the whole measurement world in general, right? So kids taking high stakes tests at home, well, what does that entail? So this is not something we're going into lightly. The proctoring platforms we have, both for our EL assessment, the Lost Links, and for Smarter Balance and the science assessment, do involve controls, if you will, do involve protocols, some level of training that we're piloting with districts across the state, and we will be making available to all districts later this month. So it does provide for more controls than just giving an open link to go take a test and just checking the score of the kid the next day. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about a controlled remote administration. But all that said, our major push and priority and request of the districts is that in-person administration should be the default for all students, that remote is really the last resort. And even for students who might be fully remote. And we're talking about, the Lost Links window is open now. That window runs till end of March, and we've reserved the right to even extend that window if we need to, and we might. The Smarter window runs till, and the science window runs till late May, early June. So hopefully that by that time, things are even better, such that even some of our remote students who are remote feel comfortable enough to come into school for not only to take the test, but hopefully for some instruction, but so that you can take the test in person in our controlled environment. That would give us the greatest confidence, if you will. But the remote option is still there. And if after all these efforts, students cannot come in, then the remote testing option is also available.
Okay, thank you. I hope many of our districts will choose to go to the end of the window versus typically it was always, we waited for that window to open, being 8th grade, you had to get on before they decided they were already in high school, come April. I hope that they, consider this year as waiting to the end of the window versus,
exactly.
Trying to get it in at the beginning.
In more recent years, about 80% of our students do take the test in May. And we have been, over the past several years, prior to last year when we didn't test, working with those districts that we saw were testing early, and we've made some personal outreaches to those districts, and we have confirmed with some large ones that, no, we're not going to do it like we did in prior years. We are going to wait till later in the window. So that is positive.
Oh, good. That's great news. Great news. Thank you.
I have a quick question. Ajit, did I hear correctly that the student assessment piece is not waivable?
That is correct.
Okay. And then the second piece, is this something that requires, this may be for the chair, is this something that requires board action, or this is an administrative department item?
I think it's probably administrative, but do we have our lawyer on? No.
Yes, Jessa is listening in. To your question, though, Dr. Du Bois Walton, while right now it is not waivable, there's a lot of national conversation that's occurring around the assessment piece, and I'm anticipating that we may get some information out of the U.S. Department of Education at some point addressing this issue.
Okay. Thank you.
Do we know anybody there?
Soon.
That's right.
Okay. It seemed like sort of a substantive policy thing. I wasn't sure if it required an action. That was the only reason I was asking. Thank you.
Thank you. Chair Taylor, I'll move forward. I know I don't want to take much more our time here of the board, but want to make sure there are two other items I want to just update you on briefly. The next is attendance and engagement, and we know how critical to all the conversations that we're having our kids in attendance and engaged in learning are so critically important to their success as we're thinking about recovery and all the things we're talking about. So I wanted to share with you data that we have, and I know Ajit is going to drive pretty soon just to show you some more information, but what you have on the screen is early information that we have to date on chronic absence. As you know, reducing chronic absence in the state has been a plan from our board plan and a strategy under Goal 1 that we've reported to you on. And so Connecticut is recognized in a press release yesterday as the first state in the country to collect, analyze, and publicly report this 2021 chronic absence data. What you can see there's some troubling realities, as you can see, in terms of chronic absence rate, in some cases almost double what they were from last year for some of our student groups. And while it is good to have that information, and we're really pleased, and we're inspiring other states to do this, Desi, Ajit, myself, and Kari were on national webinars this past week, sharing what we've done in Connecticut on data collection. But it is not data collection just for the sake of doing that. It truly is so we have a really all hands on deck approach to using that data to inform the supports that we're providing. We have that on the slide for you, the kinds of focus areas that we're working in, but we're really pleased to have the data. The report yesterday from Attendance Works and a few other organizations, they're using the Connecticut data to kind of benchmark what could be happening across the country around attendance and chronic absence. That report also did a nice spotlight on the robust efforts that we've undertaken in Connecticut for a decade now in addressing this issue. So we're having information to inform where we are, and that information is publicly available. Ajit, if you wanted just to share that as a reminder to board members that we do have that information.
Sure. Please bear with me while I switch from the PowerPoint to a web page, and I will share that momentarily. And so on this web page on EdSite, this is available, and we've shared the link before. We are collecting attendance data from districts on a monthly basis. This is being collected at the student level so that we are able to do varied analyses, and we are able to look at the attendance rate of our students, but also look at chronic absence. And the map that Charlene had on the slide is on this page, and it's interactive, so you can hover over it and it shows you which district, and this actually shows the high needs attendance rate for this year. And an attendance rate is basically an average, and when you see an attendance rate below 90% for a group, that means that group on average is chronically absent, and that's obviously not a good thing. So this map has allowed us to keep track, and it updated on a monthly basis as districts report data. Basically, we're collecting 500,000 records of data of student attendance every month from our districts. We've also been able to release like raw data files that show attendance by different categories at the district level, and also more recently the chronic absence rate like Charlene was referencing. It has allowed us to learn things like, because districts actually report attendance separately for in-person and remote days, it's allowed us to learn what percentage of our students are fully remote or have been fully remote from the beginning, meaning that they have not had even a single day of membership of enrollment in school. So that this gives us kind of a spread of what is happening in terms of how students are participating. And as the days go by, we're seeing that the hybrid bucket, where about a quarter to 3/4 of the days are in person, that bucket is kind of increasing. We've also learned things like the fact that attendance on remote days is lower than attendance on in-person days. And that's been true pretty much for all student groups, but it's actually, the impact is greater for students from our vulnerable student populations, whether it be English learners, students with disabilities, or those eligible for free meals. You can see that if they attend in person, the attendance is over 90%, but when they attend on those remote days, the attendance is substantially lower. And a 5-6%.
Why is that? What are you finding? I know you said the ESL. Is it technology? Is it technology? Is it?
I just think that this is such a new thing for us for all of us in education as a state, that we're figuring out how to engage students on remote days, how to teach concurrently on remote days. And our department under academic office leadership has put out guidance around concurrent teaching strategies. So it's a new world. As Desi mentioned, we've done a lot to address the digital divide. So it's not, I wouldn't say it's necessarily technology focused. It just is a new way of learning for our students, and so it's going to take us some practice to get better at this. So I don't have specific reasons, but we've actually talked to districts in terms of how they are engaging students on those remote days.
Thumbs up to the map, by the way. I'm sorry, Ajik, the map is awesome. I like that, where you can keep track. That is, good way of describing it. Yeah, I know. I'm all set.
So thank you. And I really just wanted for you to see the reminder that it's there, and the fact that it has gotten national attention, that is there, and that we're collecting that information, and not just having it there, but using it to inform how we're supporting districts and schools, and how communities can leverage this information as well, as we're thinking about learning losses and re-engagement. We also are learning a lot about family, what's going on even in communities. To your point, Awilda, we recognize, just because of the economic impact that has arisen based on the pandemic, that we have students that are either, in some cases, even working, older students, and, versus school. So there's a lot that we're learning, and this is allowing us to get a little bit closer. Our districts are having these conversations, talking with families, and help to figure out what other supports there can be in communities to support our families as we're supporting our students. So I wanted you to know that that's there, and we will have Peter send you the link to the press release and the national report that went out yesterday. And you might, one of the maps, one of the charts that Ajit showed, you might have seen that in previous governors' press conferences addressing the issue of the impact of in-person versus remote learning and encouraging in-person opportunities to be provided safely as possible. So that was our update on attendance and engagement. Any questions there? And then we go to our final update on FAFSA.
Yeah, Charlene, this is excellent work to you and Ajit and the team. This is absolutely incredible work because the data it tells so many stories that again we have to pursue and learn from what we're seeing. But this is absolutely magnificent. I congratulate you, and I'm delighted to know that it's being recognized nationwide because it's really exciting to be able to have all this information to make decisions and to determine what is the next step. So I just wanted to say that I'm very delighted. I'm jumping with joy. Let me put it that way.
I second Estella's jumps. I think this is.
And
Yeah, I
have
must agree. I must agree. Very nicely done. Mm-hmm.
I have to acknowledge the teachers across the state who have changed how they are tracking attendance and taking attendance. And that was a massive effort statewide, district folks working with their school leaders and working with teachers to show and change their systems and such. It was a massive effort across the whole state, and staff in my office and also the governor's open data office at OPM. It's a collaboration across a lot of different people. So kudos to everyone.
Thank you, Ajit. And final update on FAFSA, is that you, Desi, or Chris?
Chris Soto. I'll turn it over to Chris.
Great. Well, good morning, everyone. It's good to see your smiling faces on this Wednesday. And, I want to thank our board members here over the years who've supported our FAFSA work. I know many of you have been champions, and particularly Estella, who has pushed this issue over the years. And so just excited to give you an update on the FAFSA challenge, the FAFSA work, and some other CCR college career readiness work that we're doing. And so over the most recent years, we've made some strides that have put us amongst a handful of states implementing leading strategies when it comes to FAFSA. And as a result, we finished last year 4th in the nation at 68%. So this is high school seniors completing the FAFSA. But unfortunately, we know that when we disaggregate that data, we have districts who are completing 20 to 30 points below that average. And so as a result, we were planning to address this before COVID, but once COVID struck, it underscored the urgency to ensure that we didn't have a lost generation of young people pursuing their post-secondary opportunities. And so for those that are unfamiliar with FAFSA, I'll just quickly give an overview. It serves two purposes mainly. The first is being the financial aid application for federal student aid, specifically the Pell Grant and federal loans. And then second, it communicates to colleges what a family's ability to pay is for their child's higher education costs. And so in January, we decided to launch the FAFSA, the Connecticut FAFSA Completion Challenge. This is modeled after the National College Attainment Network Challenge. NCAN is a national organization that does college access work. And so we modeled our challenge after theirs that has been done nationally for 2 years in a row. And so on the slide, you can see the 3 goals, which is around sparking creativity, ultimately increasing FAFSA completion, and then improving those post-secondary outcomes, because we know that the FAFSA is the best predictor for college enrollment. And this is not also, I just want to also underscore that it's not also about just 2 or 4 year colleges. There are many post-secondary opportunities, training programs, certificate programs that allow for Pell Grants for federal student loans. And so if students want to pursue those opportunities, they can use that. And that's why the FAFSA is important for them to complete. And so the first step in crafting the challenge was to identify which districts would be eligible. And broadly, we decided that we wanted, the governor and the commissioner wanted all districts to support increased FAFSA completion. We know that COVID has put us behind where we were. When we started the school year, we were behind 16% where we were last year in terms of FAFSA completion. And so as such, at the end of this academic year, the governor and the commissioner will recognize the top 2 high schools that have the greatest FAFSA growth compared to last year. But then going back to those districts that we know that need additional support, we wanted to focus on those districts. And we know that we couldn't ask them to do more with less or more with the same, right? That would just be unfair because they were already having challenges getting students to complete the FAFSA. And so that encompassed, so that support that we wanted to provide encompassed innovation seed grants for the high schools, access to Signalvine, which is a texting platform that nudges students to complete various aspects of the process. And then these districts ultimately become part of the FAFSA learning community, which we convene and provide specific trainings, support and resources. We're there to support them with any specific needs that they have. And it allows these districts to collaborate and share best practices along with challenges. And then when we wanted to identify who would get this support, we identified high schools that had lower than 50% FAFSA completion last year. They had higher than 45% free reduced lunch population, and they had a graduating class over 50. And so that ultimately led us to about 40 high schools within 21 districts. And we asked these districts to submit an application with the initial intention of us selecting 10 districts that would be part of the learning community out of the 21. Ultimately, 16 applied, and we decided to support all 16 who are now part of that FAFSA community of practice. So that way we didn't turn any districts that had indicated that they wanted support or needed support. And so next slide, please. And so I want to take a moment to highlight the different partners that are involved in making this possible. You know, ultimately, as an agency, we're leading the challenge, and I'd like to recognize Ajit's team, who as part of this work, you may have seen the press release a few weeks ago, that launched our FAFSA dashboard, which is essentially an illustrative tool where districts can see where they're at in terms of their completion, right down to the high school. This builds on the work that we did on EdSite Secure, where schools can actually see student-level FAFSA completion data. And again, that's one of those leading strategies that states implement. We also have our partners from the Connecticut College and Career Readiness Alliance. So this is a group that consists of dozens of stakeholders, from community-based partners to higher ed institutions. We have CAPS and a bunch of some of the similar partners that you're familiar with. I referenced Signalvine, which is the texting platform for counselors and students, and they've been great working with us and directly with the districts. We had a handful of districts that were already using Signalvine before this challenge, so that's great that they're familiar. And we're also happy to be working with the College Board. They've really stepped up on this. They have a chat bot that supports students called Wyatt. And they also have College Board Opportunity Scholarships, which go to students who complete the FAFSA. And we actually get more money because the SAT is a statewide test. So there's more money for Connecticut students than there are for other states. CHESLA is the Connecticut Higher Education Supplemental Loan Authority, and they're actually one of our sponsors for the challenge, and they're going to be involved with the financial literacy training for the community of practice. And then lastly, the Connecticut Rise Network, who I think many of you are familiar with. They've been a tremendous thought partner throughout this challenge and also lead the community of practice sessions because they have a cohort of, they do this work, right? They have a community of schools that they support. And so it just made sense for them to help us lead the community of practice. So those are the partners that have been involved. And, you know, interestingly, this increased energy around FAFSA completion has also galvanized our higher ed partners because they fully understand how FAFSA declines hurt their efforts to fill their classes. So as a result, you might have seen a press release from UConn, and it's not just UConn, it's all our higher ed partners. We're working together and we've launched CT College Bound, where all the Connecticut colleges and universities are supporting virtual FAFSA sessions, and their admissions and financial aid staff are a part of that. So that's been great. And then the last update that I have is just a work on a one-page executive summary that is going to illustrate the college and career readiness work that we're doing at the agency. You know, we took a step back and recognized that there's a bunch of great work happening in this space across different departments at the agency. So we wanted to harness that and communicate it in one place. So if you as a board member or the commissioner or anybody is asked, what is the agency doing when it comes to college and career readiness, we had something that we can put in their hands. And so this is something that we can share with stakeholders, post on our website, and build on, because this is just the beginning. So be on the lookout for that document. So that concludes my report, unless you have any other questions.
Chris, Estela. Yeah, Chris, thank you so much. This is, as Desi knows very well, this is one of my goals in life. So I'm here. I can no longer jump anymore. So I'm here singing, let me put it that way. But one of the challenges for FAFSA, is the cultural sensitivity in the Latino community. Is very difficult for families to understand the need to feel it, FAFSA. So I am imagining you're addressing those issues, and hopefully you will learn how best to educate the Latino community. And I know you're very sensitive to that, about feeling FAFSA and all that. The other thing I want to say to my fellow board members, the Biden administration will be promoting free community colleges. That's probably going to happen. And free community colleges is really built on the students getting FAFSA done and then getting Pell Grants. So it's not free throughout, it's free on top of whatever Pell Grant they get. And that's also the model here in Connecticut. So this is a critical piece of having our students, especially those students that are low income, students of color, to have access to college. So thank you again for doing this. You made me extremely happy today. So I'm just delighted. Thank you.
Thank you, Estela.
Yeah, can I also add, Estela? Chris, thank you for this information, because I being in higher education, I see what Estela is saying. But in addition to that, one of the best things that happened with FAFSA is they've simplified the application, which many, if we all remember, those that went from high school into college, and it's made more feasible and easier for students and families to understand. And there's been a lot of events, like Chris, you mentioned, around the schools. I remember College Goals Sunday, where it was the Sunday where everybody completed their FAFSA. And I like the connections that you all have, and thank you again, all of you, for all the work you've put into this, because you've got to start early to discuss FAFSA with children. You can't wait until they're ready to high school and graduate and come into college. You gotta get them exposed to that whole process. But gracias, Chris, so much.
Thank you, Olivia.
Thank you. Can I also chime in? Thank you, Chris, for that report. It was timely, very informational, and I also want to do a little jumping jack. But Stella, you can still do some jumping jacks. You can just have to build into it. And as a teacher, I really believe that. So hang in there, my dear.
This was really remarkable, I think. The level of work and the sensitivity with which it's being done by the department is something that I wish we could make people throughout the state and the country fully understand. It's just remarkable.
So Chair Taylor, thank you. That was the end of our agency update. I know it's a little lengthy today, but really wanted you to get a sense of the work that's being done in the agency. By extension, you're now all ambassadors of that work going forward, and certainly appreciate all your support and being able to answer your questions. So that's the end of our agency updates for today.
Okay, so where are we on this agenda? Doesn't exactly match up.
We're in the absentee, the report.
School discipline, I think, is next. Item B.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. We'll jump right into that. And we have John Fasanelli and also Ajit that will be back on to take us through our report of school discipline. 4 members, our school discipline report to the board started back in 2014. And after a couple of submissions, we had legislation that mandated that we submit this to you. And so our reports after that
Thank you, Charlene. I'll start off a little bit with the data, and then I'll turn it over to John as well. You have the full report with you. Before I launch into a few of the highlights for some of the new board members, when we're talking about disciplinary sanctions here, we're talking about in-school suspensions, out-of-school suspensions, or expulsions. Those are the types of sanctions that districts mete out in certain cases, and those are the incidents that are required to be reported to the State Department of Education, as well as some incidents that are labeled as serious. And an in-school suspension, just to sort of frame that, is when a student is removed from the classroom for more than 90 minutes. That's when it gets triggered as an in-school suspension. So just to sort of frame that here. We look at the data in a couple of ways. One is just counting up the number of times a student has number of suspensions that have been handed out. And we call that a duplicated count, in the sense that a student might receive multiple, one student might receive multiple suspensions, whether it be in school or out of school or expulsion. But we also do something called a suspension rate. And when we do a suspension rate, what we're saying, we're looking at an unduplicated count of students. And we're saying, of the total number of students you have, or in a particular group, whether it be by race or gender or whatever, how many of them received at least one in-school suspension, out-of-school suspension, or expulsion. So it's a student count, it's a rate that looks at the percentage of students, whether all or within a subgroup. So I just wanted to mention that before we get into the data. And the challenge this year with the 1920 data, obviously, is with the shortened year, the numbers are a little skewed less, if you will, than we would see in a normal year. So in the report, we report the 1920 data. We share that with you. They're already on EdSite, on the public site. But when we do trend analysis, we're still doing it based on the 1819 data and not really claiming large reductions because of lower numbers in 1920. Just wanted to mention that. And I think with that, I'll get into some of the findings here. You know, we have seen declines in suspensions and expulsions, both in school and out of school suspensions and expulsions, and we've sort of substantial declines over the last several years due to the work that has been going on. We've also focused particularly on the school policy violation area, which is students may receive in school or out of school suspensions for violating school policies, and we've talked about these insubordination, what's the word I'm looking for? Discretionary sort of actions where there might be some discretion in the practice, and we've focused particularly on those, and we've seen substantial reductions in that area. From 59% of our incidents some years ago used to be school policy violations, and it came down to 42%. So we're continue to focus on that. When we look at disparities in suspension rates, and here is where the it's an unduplicated count. We see that disparities are still high. And here we're even looking at 1920 data because we're really looking at disparities between groups. We see that 1 out of 10 Black African American students are experiencing a suspension or expulsion. 1 out of 14 Hispanic Latino students, and 1 out of 34 white students. So we still see that there is disproportionality statewide and among several districts with regard to discipline data. Moving along, there is in our state law, and even prior to our state law, which came around I believe in 2015-16, we have focused on suspensions for our youngest students, and we have continued to see declines in suspensions for students in grades pre-K through 2. The statute actually now does not allow for out-of-school suspensions in those grades unless the behavior endangers others, is violent, or is of a sexual nature. Only then can an out-of-school suspension come into play. So we've seen reductions in the lowest of our grades. We are seeing that students of color, Black and African American, Hispanic, Latino students seem to receive more than one suspension or expulsion. We're involved in multiple incidents during the year at a greater rate than their white peers. So that is something we continue to see even in 1920. And we also probed particularly into certain types of incidents, and those are documented in the report that deal with, for example, bringing a knife to school. And we picked those incidents to see, are students of color receiving more, what we would consider a more severe sanction, which would be an out-of-school suspension or an expulsion. And we do see that in 3 of the 4 cases, we do see that Black African American students are receiving a more severe sanction for those exact same behaviors than white students. And now I'll jump briefly discuss the district hearing that Deputy Commissioner Russell Tucker referenced in her opening around the requirement that was put forward for us pursuant to that stipulated resolution with the Alicia B case. With that district hearing, what we had to do was we used our same primary metric, which is the suspension rate. But just to be totally clear here, we made a decision to use the 18-19 tiering data and not the 19-20 tiering because of the effect of the pandemic. So we chose to use the 18-19 tiers to identify those districts that need state support. And a brief overview of this tiering methodology, and I want to really sort of frame that before I turn it over to John to discuss the kinds of supports and interventions. Just be mindful that we've used a bit data here, the 18-19 data, and we didn't really have the 19-20 solid data to use. So we've used 18-19 data. We are mindful of the fact that districts may have implemented, and districts, we know that districts are paying attention to these data because we focused on these, but because we're using 18-19 tiering information, that district work may be ongoing. And while we may have tiered them into tiers 3 and 4, for example, perhaps they're doing some things already that are working to counter some of these trends. So we want to be mindful of that. And in the work that we're doing, we're clearly starting off from a strengths-based approach, from a recognition that districts may be doing stuff, and we need to start with where they're at and build from that. We have had tremendous commitment from our districts, and again, Charlene and I, we've presented this report to the board for 8 years, 7 or 8 years, I think, and we've brought some districts forward in some cases who have committed to doing this work, and we know that districts are committed to doing this work. I think this just, as you can see from the trends, I think this tiering effort really just takes it to another level that was required under the stipulated agreement with this Alicia B case. So I just wanted to sort of frame that. And when we tier districts in this fashion, just know that we're looking at all districts, including regional school districts, charter school districts, and our technical high school, which is a district unto itself. And we do see in the data that suspension rates do increase with grade. So you'll see higher rates of suspension in the higher grades. So that is something that we recognize in the data. So briefly, how are we placing districts into tiers? We created this 4-tier system, and we said, first, let's do a cut of districts who have high suspension rates. They may also have disproportionality, but let's just look at high suspension rates. And here, we're looking particularly at their overall suspension rate, or their suspension rate for Black African-American students, or their suspension rate for Hispanic Latino students. If that suspension rate is greater than or equal to 15% in 2 years, in 2 consecutive years, then that district would be identified in Tier 4. Then we go to Tier 3. Among the remaining districts, do they have high disproportionality? Here we're looking at what we call the Relative Risk Index, or the RRI. And what is a Relative Risk Index? It's really a comparison of suspension rates. And we're just saying, are Black students or Hispanic students getting suspended at least 3 times the rate of white students? If that is evidenced in those districts, either for Black students or Hispanic students, again, 2 years in a row, then those districts get identified in Tier 3. You step it down to Tier 2. Instead of 3 times the rate, we're now doing 2 times the rate for Black or Hispanic students. If they're getting suspended at twice the rate of white students, either group, for 2 consecutive years, then we put them in Tier 2. Everybody else falls into Tier 1. So I hope that at least gives you a sense of how we tier districts. The report, the link to the EdSite report is in the report we sent, and it is publicly available. We have shared this with the districts as well in advance of this presentation. But I just wanted to at least give a brief overview of the data that we normally present, but also the tiering pursuant to the stipulated agreement for the case. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to John.
Thank you, Ajit. And we will talk about the tiered supports that we're going to be providing under the Alicia V settlement in just a couple of minutes. But I wanted to first go back and talk about some of the work that's been ongoing with regard to school discipline. So could I have the next slide, please? And so as the board is aware, based on the presentations that have occurred over the last few years, there's a significant amount of work happening around reducing suspensions and expulsions in schools, certainly working to address disproportionality in those numbers as well. And so the report that we provided to you covers those, most of those soup to nuts. And so we're just going to touch on a couple of the items here and refer you back to the report. As you know, the work around school discipline really starts with the analysis of the data in district levels, and then targeting supports to support districts in their efforts to develop policies and procedures that are conducive to reducing exclusionary discipline. I also want to recognize Kim Traverso, who's on the call, who leads this work for the agencies, and she can provide some additional context as we move forward. One of those areas that we focus very specifically on is under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which focuses on disproportionality for students receiving special education services. Kim works specifically on Indicator 4, which is disproportionate suspensions and expulsions on students who are receiving special education services. And the other part of that is disproportionality in the students who are receiving exclusionary discipline who are also students of color. So we focus very specifically on that, and we target supports and work with districts to develop corrective action plans on the work to turn those numbers around for those districts who have high numbers. That's just an example of one of the very specific targeted supports that we provide. And then we continue to provide policy guidance and professional learning around all of this work, working with districts to utilize restorative alternatives to exclusionary discipline. We assist with the development of classroom practices that are conducive to supporting students. Certainly over the last few years, there's been an increased focus on trauma-informed services for students. We certainly know that the effect of acute trauma, sort of high-level acute trauma, is certainly significant on the social emotional well-being of students. But what we're also seeing, and we're also working on, and particularly in the era of COVID, is how are we supporting those students who are sort of continually addressing or getting hit with sort of low-level trauma, right? Students of color certainly are faced with sort of continual trauma related to race. Some of our families who are newly in economic dire circumstances, additional trauma resulting from unstable housing situations, also issues with food insecurity routinely, and also certainly exacerbated under COVID. So we continue to work with districts on developing practices, policies, and provide professional learning for those to assist in that endeavor. You mentioned the pre-K to grade 2 supports. Certainly with the changing of the law in 2015-16, we've been working with districts who have been outliers early on when districts were learning how to address the overuse of exclusionary discipline in that population. We worked directly with districts, actually brought them in for a mandatory meeting to talk about how we can help them reduce their exclusionary discipline of that population, because there are specifics around the use of exclusionary discipline in that population, particularly in preschool. We're partnering with the Office of Early Childhood also so that we can be consistent in our messaging around the elimination of exclusionary practices among all of our preschool students, whether they're being served in our school buildings or whether they're being served in Head Start and school readiness program. And then, as you are aware, there's a lot of work happening around social emotional learning. It has become sort of a front burner conversation across the state and across the nation. In September, we issued a statewide landscape scan, which is a sort of a fancy term for a statewide survey with districts to find out exactly what they are doing, what practices they're employing on social emotional learning to support students. And so that we can garner best practices that are happening, and in collecting that information, not to think about supplanting what they're doing, but how do we partner with them to share the good work that they're doing and how we can assist them in sort of elevating the work that's happening. Most recently, last month, we issued a social emotional universal and supplemental screening assessment, as Deputy Commissioner Russell Tucker alluded to early on. This is a fantastic opportunity. We were in the process of contracting with a provider to provide every district with the opportunity to participate and utilize this SEL screening assessment in their district at no cost to them. That will be rolling out very soon. The other portion of that that's noteworthy is that there is also a supplemental assessment for students who sort of red flag as high risk on the original assessment. This is an ability to drill down with those students to get more detail on what their needs are so that districts can target additional supports to those specific students. And then finally, many of you are familiar with the School Discipline Collaborative. We talked about it last month at the Policy and Legislative Subcommittee, and many of you have attended those collaborative meetings. This is, again, under Deputy Commissioner Russell Tucker's leadership, we stood this up, and it's just a tremendous gathering of educational stakeholders in the broadest sense of the word. We have advocates there, we have teachers, we have superintendents, we have school leaders, we have education lawyers who work with districts, we have parent engagement specialists, we have parents, we have all kinds of folks there to talk about all of the issues around exclusionary discipline and how discipline is happening in different parts of the state. It's a very candid and very open conversation, and there really are nothing that we won't discuss. It's just a really fantastic opportunity to talk about the issues of race and other specific issues facing students today in schools. We have many times had conversations around critical consciousness. We've brought experts from around the country to come and speak to this group. We've talked about a specific activity that we did was a walkthrough on the history of public education in Connecticut and in the nation, and how different laws, policies, regulations, and practices over the centuries have contributed to the situation that we are in today. Additionally, one of the specific sort of publications that came out of that group were family guides on suspension and expulsion. These are sort of an explanation for families on what the laws are governing student expulsion and suspension, what their rights are, and what the opportunities are. And it's not meant as a tool for families to use, wield against districts. It's really promote a conversation among families and their advocates with districts to talk about what they can do together as bona fide partners in their child's education, to work together to understand how we can reduce exclusionary discipline in our schools. The last thing that's not on this slide that I just wanted to mention, again, we've been very excited about standing up meetings with behavioral health providers in the state. We've named it the Behavioral Health and Wellness Task Force. When we brought together, folks like Clifford Beers and Wellmore and other behavioral health providers who are working directly in schools, we brought in the Department of Children and Families from the commissioner level, also the Department of Social Services. And what we're hoping to do is really look at what resources are available to support behavioral health provision in the schools, to sort of bolster what's already occurring with school counselors and social workers and school psychologists in schools, where we can bring in behavioral health providers and develop a funding mechanism that supports not just a per student or a one-to-one provision of services through Medicaid and other insurances, but how can we use those fundings to create an environment in which we can support those tier 2 students, but also support the entire school environment with behavioral health support. And we're very confident that we're going to be able to work through that. And we're working with DSS to look at the potential third-party reimbursement for some of that work. Next slide, please. Next slide. So getting back to the conversation that Charlene and Ajit introduced, this is a tiered system of supports for us for districts is not new, but we have developed some additional supports in a tiered fashion to support school districts as a result of the conversation and the decisions around the Alicia B settlement. So tier 1 are the supports that we plan to provide for all students, the lowest part of the pyramid. And to Ajit's point, the first thing I wanted to share is this is in partnership with districts. The work around Alicia B is not meant to single out districts for their work. It's really for us to say, we want to partner with you. And given that we're using 2 years ago, the 2019 data, to put folks into tiers, as you mentioned, we want to highlight the work that the AMA have been doing in the last year and a half to support all students. So this is work that we're planning on providing to all districts, regardless of the tier. So providing guidance and ongoing training for districts to address concerns around school discipline. We will continue the professional learning and sharing of best practices. Some of these folks in tier 1 are doing some excellent work, and we want to be able to share that work with other districts in the other tiers to be able to support that. And then how we call it our school discipline protocol, looking at how the beliefs, policies, practices, and procedures on the school level are either assisting with reducing exclusionary discipline or contributing to it. And that assessment is ongoing. And then look at exactly what they're doing. What are the current interventions and how are they implementing them? Are they implementing with fidelity in areas around school climate, equity, social emotional behavioral supports, family engagement, and mental health? We want to look at what they're doing and be able to target resources that are the most effective without falling into sort of what we call an intervention fatigue. Next slide. So tier 2, the middle of the tier, we continue to use data to drive actions and monitor progress. Again, all of the tiers will receive the tier 1 support. So this is tier 2 is building on those tier 1 supports and continuing to work with them, provide professional learning and technical assistance with a little more focus on the district's self-assessment and targeting their implementations and targeting their supports based on their needs and based on the data, and doing some resource mapping to, again, look at what's working, what's not working, and continue to do that work. Next slide. So this is a tier 3 and 4. There are about 17 or 18 districts in tier 3 and about 23 or 4 in tier 4. So these are our high touch districts. They are certainly already getting a significant amount of supports through the turnaround office and through our educational supports and wellness work focuses a lot on this group of districts. And so we are going to continue to do that. And so again, establishing a community of practice where we bring in those districts to talk about what is their quarterly progress, how are they monitoring that, and a sharing of best practices and things that are moving them in the right direction. It's also characterized by individual coaching sessions with districts, sort of one-on-one with school districts, and how we can implement some best practices. Again, continued professional learning from the first 2 tiers and targeted professional learning. And then assessing what their utilization of the existing funding sources and how are they using that to support this work. We heard earlier, we know there's going to be a significant amount of ESSER II funding that's out there. We want to encourage these districts to use some of that funding to provide social emotional supports for students to address mental health and behavioral health concerns in their districts and provide continuous professional learning for all of the staff in their building to support their students. So we're continuing to look at that and have conversations with that. And then, as you know, this work isn't embedded in one part of the department. Through our deputy commissioners and our commissioner, through Deputy Commissioner Charlene Russell Tucker and Desi Nesmith. This is all hands on deck. This is a priority for the agency, working across agency to align supports, whether it's targeted supports for charter schools, alliance districts, magnet schools. Each have their own unique challenges, and so across agency we're working together to provide those supports targeted to the specific needs based on that work. So thank you so much for your time, and we can answer any questions that you have.
Thank you. There are questions or comments?
Yes, Stella here.
Go ahead, Stella.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to again thank Ajit and for the data and collection and for the presentation, and also John for what is being done. I'm also very pleased to see that the charter schools are being included in the tier process, and therefore making them accountable also for progress in that area. So this is all again very powerful. I'm delighted to see progress, and I'm delighted to see the sort of a cultural shift in looking at students' behavior, not as the action to be suspensions, but to have tools to deal with those behaviors that encourage them to be engaged and stay in school. So thank you again to both of you. And the progress is incredible. It's not as fast as one would wish, but it's right there. You could see it. And the shifting cultural approaches is also very powerful. So thank you.
Bonnie.
I just want to echo what Estella said, and I want to thank you guys for the amount of effort that we're putting in on the social emotional learning piece. It's going to be interesting to see where the data goes to show how youth that are challenged are going to be responding. And so thank you for bringing that data forward, and look forward to seeing where it goes in the future.
Anybody else? I've got a question. Did something change in the law between 2017 and 2018? I was struck by the fact that the incidents resulting in suspension or expulsion were 100% on all the racial categories or ethnic in 2017-18, and then they started differing.
Chairman Taylor, are you looking to a specific table in the report?
Yeah, I'm sorry, on page 14, table 14. Knife 2.5 inches or greater.
I see. Okay, got it. Yeah, in that case, it's I don't know of a legal change, but all I'll point is that that relates to a smaller subset of the student population. I mean, we're looking at a total of 100-odd students and incidents across the state, 100-odd incidents across the state. So it's a smaller subset of the case. So that could just be natural variability, but I'm not aware of a particular legal change in that area.
When there were 175 incidents, everybody got suspended or expelled. And then as the number of incidents dropped, that was no longer true. It just struck me as curious. It made me curious. Anything else from anybody? Woody?
In the situation where students of color are receiving much harsher penalties than white students, is something being done about this? How do we address that?
I think definitely the answer is yes. All of the work is geared toward reducing the disproportionality, and I'll ask Kim to jump in on some specific things that she's doing. But the efforts, all of those efforts around trauma-informed approaches, around social emotional learning, around classroom management practices that are conducive to supporting students rather than sending students out. We know some of this is related to unconscious bias, and we're working with folks to understand, we all bring biases with us. And so working with teachers and all of the folks that work with students to understand that plays a factor, and how do we create environments that students of color are welcomed, they're encouraged, and they're supported in their work, and that's the crux of the work, is really addressing the disproportionality. Kim, if you're still on, you can talk specifically on some of the things that you've been working directly on.
Hi, everyone. I am on. For some reason, I can't get my video on, so I apologize. I actually, I'm sorry. Oh, I am on. Great. Hi. So John said it very well. I just would probably add to that is that we are definitely looking at student voice because we feel that is so important, and they need to be heard as far as what's happening in the school districts. And we're also including family and community members with that as well. And the concept that we're really thinking about here is looking at, one is building systems so that it's not random, number one. Number two is how are we customizing the fit and organizing all their initiatives under one umbrella so that they are going to be impactful. And number two is to make sure that this cascade of support over time. So we're looking at tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3, but we want to make sure that we have the right intervention support services that are going to be provided. The third thing is that we're actually looking at adult actions. So it's not always about the kids. And so we want to make sure that we're also looking at how we can build capacity in having educators understand diffusion and de-escalation techniques, and working and connecting with our students and families.
And I would also add and appreciate that question. None of this is disconnected from where we started earlier in the board meeting. When we talk about our position statement, when we talk about the work that CERC is doing on racial justice, and all of that work is not disconnected. It truly is a part of the cumulative effort that is going to take to address all these issues together.
It's interesting, Charlene, you brought that up, and you just took some of my words that I was going to add, and I appreciate that, is that we can't forget the capacity level of the community. We've got to, years ago, community was in the schools, right? We used to bring in different role models and people that the students could relate to, because in looking at this report, the majority of the they're males, African American and Latinos, and not anything different. When I joined the commission last year, we were talking about the same thing too, that it's the males, and that concerns me. Okay, because when there's the dropout rate coming into higher education, we want to see more males, and so therefore, and even in applications when they're applying, they're saying, have you been convicted? You have behaviors, all that stuff that I disagree with, right? Because but anyway, we can't forget that we need to have more outreach for our males, our Latinos and African American males, because this conversation is still going on. And again, I recall when I joined the board last year, the commission. Okay, so it just breaks my heart, because I want to see more males graduate from college and more young men. And then in looking at this information too is, I'm looking at kindergarten kids. If you all had a chance to kindergarten, it's sad to see that kindergarten kids are throwing things. And again, and we look back and I know that you're doing a lot of parenting. Some great work is coming out of the work you're all doing. So I just bring that up because I always think about our long life citizens that we have to see someday growing up, and they're going to be our neighbors, etc.
Thank you for that. And I think none of this work is disconnected, right? So we look at school discipline as how it contributes to attendance. We look at family engagement and how family engagement impacts school connectedness. So all of the work that's happening, we talk about systems of support for school discipline and systems of support for attendance, but all of the work happens together. And that's, we have conversations around how we're addressing attendance with homeless students, and how school discipline impacts attendance and increases school connectedness. So all of this work it's actually pretty exciting to think about, right? Because we're talking about holistically supporting our students in our schools and our faculty in our schools, about how all of these things factor into providing opportunities for success for kids.
Yeah, the data is terrific, and I think it helps to get to the core of the issue in individual districts. Can you do the same thing for individual schools at this kind of level of specificity?
Yeah, we do it, Mr. Trefry. We actually now publish on EdSite. We publish school level results, but also the person on my staff, Corinne Felder, who works on the discipline data, actually works closely with Kim, where if there are some concerning areas, they actually get down to sharing that information back and forth with each other, and then Kim is able to follow up with the individual district about particular cases, especially with those younger kids. And Dr. Riasco, you were mentioning the kindergarten cases, right? So the pre-K through 2 space, they do a lot of partnership and work together to sort of follow up on that. So short answer is yes, school level reporting is possible and is already being done on EdSite, but there's also additional work down to the student level and individual follow-ups that happen already.
That's great. It makes it it really helps make it more manageable to make a difference. Thank you.
Yeah, and makes it more actionable for the schools too, because just talking in averages and percentages is one thing, but then intervene at the student level and talk about particular cases means a lot.
Thanks.
Other question? Erin, are you?
If I could just follow up with Bob's comment, just so that you know, there are actually some schools that will take that information and take it into individual schools, but not even just to the schools, but the time of day in which these incidents occurred, in order to address it. Just so that you know, I've worked with districts before, and I worked in a district that did that. That literally, we knew our worst time of the day was when 8th graders were dismissed from lunch, and it helped schools address some of discipline areas and try to address it that way. So there are a lot of districts that take this information and just do a big deep dive and just see exactly what's going on. And a lot of times they do find out there are particular times of the day that things are spiked up as far as discipline goes.
I know Charlene is smiling because thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about school breakfast, because we found that some of the data that students were misbehaving around 9:30 or 10 o'clock in the morning, and once the school district implemented a school breakfast program, they found that some of that misbehavior and some of that anxiousness and some of that stuff sort of stopped. So there are so many opportunities to create situations that can be conducive to reducing the discipline that's happening, and it's all over the place, from food, from breakfast to teacher actions to understanding students and all of that. So
but
I'll add to it. I think I've said to you before, our teachers just loved in our school when they introduced those smoothies on Wednesday. We had the greatest Wednesday morning ever that you could possibly have. They were on time, they well behaved, they sat at their desks, and they were happy. So I always think of that. Those smoothie Wednesdays were the best.
But you mentioned drilling down on schools. And if you find a school where the students of color are receiving much harsher penalties than the white students, and you mentioned the unconscious bias, is there anything you can do to address bias in those cases?
Yeah, and Kim can probably talk more specifically about this, but yes, I mean, I think through our partners at CERC, who do a really great job of assisting and providing some racial justice instruction to districts and support. And I know Kim has worked directly with them to address that specifically in schools. Kim, I don't know if you wanted to comment more on that.
Sure. So we actually have done several things in looking at unconscious bias. Last year, I think you mentioned this earlier, John, is that we also provided leadership training webinars back in June on unconscious bias and critical race theory. Dr. Darren Graves led that conversation, but we also have been looking at individual schools. So when we're looking at building systems, and especially when CERC has been a partner with us, already embedded into that system is about equity, and also how can we embed that throughout the tiers. So there is a conversation, or a courageous conversation, around race, and not to blame or to shame, but more of a conversation to say, okay, what's going on here? Here's the data. The data isn't lying. We know that this is what's happening, that disproportionately Black and brown kids are being suspended. So let's talk about the elephant in the room. And so when we can begin those kind of conversations where there's building of trust, and that it's not I got you, but we want to help you, we get a much different kind of reaction. And we've been doing this work, as Charlene said, we've been doing this back when the collaborative started, but also back when we started with pre-K to 2 back in 2015. So this is a continuous work. It is embedded in everything that we do, especially because we feel that many of the situations, you don't know what you don't know. So we have to bring it to the surface.
Thank you. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
I guess, yeah, just one more. Can you correlate these to dropout rates too? Look at the students that have had disciplines, and is that a predictor of somebody dropping out of school?
Short answer is it plays a part for sure. And I think John said it best when he said that, from the support perspective, they use sort of a system of support. We see that on the data side too. I think you all know about the early indication tool that we have for our districts, where we use all of the longitudinal data to try to alert districts about students who may need additional levels of support. In that modeling, discipline data and attendance data, along with test scores and course failures and things like that, all those factors do play a part. So so short answer is yes, it definitely plays a part in the mix, and we're not necessarily trying to put out it plays this much of a part or quantify the extent of because it varies, but it is definitely a very important part of the modeling that we do to give districts the information about students who need support.
Thanks.
Okay. Any other questions or comments?
Thank you. It's a very impressive piece of work. I think very important to keep tracking this in this kind of detail.
Okay. Somebody want to say something?
Committee reports.
Committee reports. Academic standards.
Eric left already, but the committee is meeting on Tuesday.
Thank you. Accountability.
We met on January 19th. We had two in the New Britain High School that came for an update, and we also had Waterbury District that came also for an update on the out-of-class absences and other issues. And they were meeting on February 18th to continue our agenda.
Thank you. Finance has not met. Legislation.
We met this morning, and we again we were reviewing the bylaws that were brought to us at retreat, and had some discussions over some possible revisions that we might make to that. We will revisit it again next month because there were some things that we were unsure of, and Justice is going to look into it for us. And what we did decide, though, is that part of the bylaws is an organizational meeting that has to take place by the June meeting of the full board. And so we will wait for that meeting to actually present the bylaws to you. We thought that would be a better way to do it versus bringing in for approval and then that June meeting possibly changing them again. You know, if it is something we could do, not saying that we will do, but that's what we're planning on doing. So we did look at them again. We've made a lot of revisions already, and they will be given to the full board and on the agenda for that organizational meeting in June.
Great, thank you. CTEX.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to have Jeff do the update this month. He is out there somewhere in the
ether.
In the ether, yeah. Well, the other thing I mentioned last time, we had some new board members who basically we're almost totally turned over, and a lot of energy, and some great people, and you can feel it. It's really great.
Good.
Well, there he is.
I get.
Thank you, Chairman. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thanks, Chairman Taylor. Just briefly from the CTEX board meeting last month, we reported out on some teaching and learning situations. We are working on a grading committee to assist students with becoming more successful with their grading. We're planning on looking at providing students with more time to complete work, students who are struggling with some of the online aspects. We've also established what we're calling a Looking to the Future committee. It's working on developing remediation strategies for students that would include all of the things that the Deputy Commissioner had talked about earlier, extended day, extended school year in the summertime, in the fall, and that would even include our graduating seniors. We are discussing allowing our seniors who meet high school graduation requirements to go ahead and graduate with their classmates, this June. But we still will provide evening trade training for them in the summer and the fall next year, because we know that they're missing out on some of the online or they're missing out on some of the hands-on tactile experiences that they've been used to being in the hybrid model since the beginning of the year. Those are some of the big highlights from the board meeting this past month.
Any questions for Jeff? How are the students reacting to not being able to be in the shop?
They're not happy. I mean, they want to be in their shops all the time, certainly, so when I've been doing, I've been going around to all of the buildings and conducting focus groups with the kids, and, they want to be in their shops and their trade areas. They kind of miss that. What we've been trying to do to overcome that is we've been giving the upperclassmen the opportunity to do work-based internships out in the communities and their trade areas, which normally we don't do that until the second half of the year. We allowed them to start doing that, right from the first day of school, so that they could, make up for a little bit of that. But certainly the kids are disappointed that they're not in their shops. There's no two ways around it.
And what about reaction from employers? Are they going to be as interested in the kids graduating this year as they normally are?
They will. The kids will still graduate with their 1,500 hours of pre-apprenticeship time, so that they will qualify for a pre-apprenticeship upon graduation, because it is based on competency. They will still have to show competency in the skills to get those, to get those. So, the kids are still going to have to do a lot of work, catching up their skills, and we're going to provide them with those opportunities. But I think particularly in the highly sought after areas in precision machining, manufacturing, IT, I think that the workforce demand is, they'll be happy to work with the kids, with the skills that they have.
Good, thank you. Any other questions or comments?
Jeff, you mentioned providing students with more time to complete work. Why is that? What's going on?
Just not having the opportunity to be with their teachers on a day-to-day basis becomes a barrier. It's a physical barrier. I think it's a lot easier for the kids when they're in the teacher's room. Hey, you know what? I'm struggling with this skill. I think sometimes the distance provides a little bit of a barrier for shy kids, anxious kids, kids who are typically vulnerable. You really have to go, above and beyond to remediate social settings for kids. There's some kids that are going to do fine, no matter what, but, you're always thinking about providing remediations and opportunities for kids. They're doing wonderful things in this new, this new paradigm of teaching online. But, it's still, as was denoted earlier, very wisely, there's still a lot to learn about great, distance learning education. And, so we're still seeking out better ways to do it. And we didn't want to put up, we don't want to put more hurdles in front of the kids on the track, at this time where they're going to struggle more, with this new paradigm in learning. We're trying to find, our power or priority standards and focus on those, more than anything, and try to support the kids as much as we can with, giving them the opportunities to make up work late and not penalize them for, time. We don't want to, have time be an issue, as long as they're showing mastery on the skills, upon the end of the year, upon graduation. We wanted to be compassionate with them.
Nice. Yeah. Thank you for that, Jeff. Online teacher, online, what we call the online virtual office hours. It sounds odd, but it adds to having that the students reach out to their teachers. Yes. But nice work. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a father of twins, and my daughter doesn't have any hesitation of reaching out for help. But my son is very shy, and it's like pulling teeth to get him to ask a question to the teacher online.
Yeah, one size doesn't fit all when it comes to, yeah, it does not, yeah. But thank you, Jeff.
Thanks, Jeff.
Okay. Anything on NASB from anybody?
Yes, I can report. I attended my first meeting of the conference planning committee.
Oh,
and they're
great.
talking about an in-person annual conference late in the year. And they're talking about topics. So if you have any topics that you'd like to be considered at the annual conference, I could pass them on. And also, I'm still working on the article about the educator diversity initiatives in Connecticut and other states. I've learned that Massachusetts is doing a lot, just as Connecticut is. And they asked me to include other states, you know, and there are other states that I've contacted. They're way behind. They're talking about plans, but they haven't actually introduced any programs the way Connecticut and Massachusetts have. So that's been interesting.
When you said late in the year for the NASB conference, was that late in the year that ends in June or late in the year that ends in December?
This year, I think it was November of this year, of 2021.
Sounds good. Thank you. And CERC, anything from CERC or about CERC?
I think Ingrid covered that very nicely for us, for all board members to see the work of CERC. We have a board meeting next month.
Okay, thank you. Okay, is there anything else? I think we are adjourned then. We've come to the end of the agenda. Stay well, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Take care.